My name is Madison Carter, 32 years old. I used to be the small-town girl sitting quietly at my in-laws' dinner table, listening to my husband's mother criticize the way I held a wine glass. I used to be the wife standing at the sidelines of her own life, pretending not to notice the shady messages on my husband's phone, pretending to be happy in a mansion that never felt like mine. And today, I sat in a divorce courtroom watching the man who once promised to protect me laugh as he signed the papers saying, "Good luck back in Nebraska, waitressing might suit you." He had no idea. Have you ever been underestimated by the person you loved so deeply that they truly believed you couldn't stand on your own? Leave a comment if you've ever been dismissed, betrayed, or pushed aside, only to one day become the one who rewrites the whole story. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me, because what happened next made sure he never laughed again. I grew up in a small Midwest town, where the rooster's crow still beat the morning alarm, and people called each other by name, not business titles. My dad was a mechanic, my mom worked as a librarian at the local public library. We were always short on money, but never short on decency or pride. I studied hard, not because I wanted to stand out, but because I knew it was the only way out of the town I loved, but couldn't stay in forever. Thanks to a full scholarship, I made it to New York, the city I'd only seen on postcards. I studied economics at NYU, worked part-time at a cafe near campus, ate more instant noodles than vegetables, and scribbled personal finance plans in a notebook with a broken spine. I had nothing fancy, but I had ambition, and I believed I deserved a better life. I met Brandon Carter in the spring of my junior year at a finance seminar hosted by the Brookfield Institute. He was the keynote speaker, a Harvard alum and the only son of the Carter family, a name everyone in Manhattan's investment world knew. Brandon walked into that seminar like he was born to be admired. Neatly combed brown hair, perfectly tailored gray suit, spotless leather shoes. He didn't have to raise his voice. People automatically went quiet when he spoke. My studies partner in my crew, Andrew, also designed on my coach, never quite realized just how much he was worth. People automatically went quiet when he spoke. I still remember the first time Brandon noticed me. During the Q&A session, I raised my hand and asked about the practicality of an opportunity cost model he had mentioned. The entire room turned to look, as if they couldn't believe the girl in the worn-out sweater dared question someone like Brandon. After the session, I was about to slip out quietly when he approached me, looked at me half curious, half amused. "Smart," he said, "but no polish. Let me help you shine." At the time, I thought it was a compliment. Now, I see it was the first sign. Brandon didn't really see me. He saw an unfinished sketch he believed he could repaint in his image. We started seeing each other often. Brandon invited me for coffee, then dinners at places I'd never dared to step into. He always ordered for me, explained the wines, gently adjusted the back of my coat if it was off-center. At first I thought it was considerate. Later I realized it was control. Brandon loved talking about his family. His grandfather, who founded the largest real estate investment trust in the Northeast. His mother, a well-known philanthropist. His father, a financial advisor to several senators. He spoke with enthusiasm, but always with an unspoken message. I didn't come from that world. But he was granting me access. A beautiful kind of condescension. I used to wonder, did he truly love me, or was I just a passing fascination, a girl who stood out because she didn't fit? But when Brandon looked proud of me as I analyzed a market chart, when he stayed up listening to me talk about my dream of starting a financial firm for women, I believed. I truly believed that even if we didn't begin as equals, love could make everything fair. I graduated with honors. Brandon took me out to celebrate at a rooftop bar overlooking Manhattan. That night he gave me a small blue velvet box. Not a ring, but a vintage watch, the back engraved with my name. "You deserve something better than a Casio," he joked. I laughed, hiding the tiny sting inside. Later, I received a job offer from a branch office of an investment firm in Arizona. I was going to turn it down, but Brandon encouraged me to go. "It's an emerging market. You'll have more opportunities without New York's shadow over you," he said. I left New York, carrying love, and his promise that he'd follow soon. Brandon showed up in Arizona 3 months later, with a ring and a proposal under the sky lanterns of the Sedona Festival. I said yes, through tears. At the time, I thought, I must really be lucky. A girl from Nebraska, raised on scholarship money, about to marry a man people envied. What I didn't realize was that somewhere in Brandon's eyes, what remained wasn't love, but a patriarchal kind of pride. As if I was his creation. "Madison," he once said when I wore a floral dress my mom had mailed me from home, "you should try something classier. You're too smart to dress like a cashier." I laughed it off. And I also laughed when he gently suggested I consider stepping back from work to focus on being a wife. His career was entering a critical phase. I laughed because I didn't yet know how to say no, because I still believed maybe he wanted what was best. But now, looking back, each of those remarks, each time he adjusted my hair, each subtle insult disguised as flattery, were all warnings. The only tragedy is, I wasn't clear-headed enough then to understand. Sometimes, love isn't salvation. It's how they get you to forget who you were. Our wedding took place in early October, surrounded by rows of trees just starting to turn golden, at a luxury resort in Sedona. The sky was clear, the breeze soft, the setting picture-perfect, like something out of a romantic film. I wore a classic white lace gown, walking down an aisle strewn with rose petals personally selected by Helen, my mother-in-law, from a list of 3 florists acceptable for the Carter standard. As I stepped into the chapel, Helen leaned toward a relative and whispered, "Brandon could have married a real heiress, but I suppose she'll do." I heard it, and I pretended I didn't. They always spoke about me like I was the last acceptable alternative. Smart but provincial, educated but lacking pedigree. Brandon always played the part of the gracious husband, adjusting my train, smiling as he held my hand in front of guests, kissing my forehead gently before stepping on stage to speak. But the look in his eyes always carried the same message. Be grateful. After the wedding, we moved into Brandon's estate in Scottsdale, Arizona. A house nearly 9,000 square feet, marble floors, ceilings over 25 feet high, glass doors overlooking a pool and meticulously trimmed cactus garden. Everything was perfect. Every detail screamed elegance, designed to impress, but so cold, I didn't dare take off my shoes on the marble. I hung a few paintings I loved. Warm tones, hand-painted oils from old study trips. Brandon took them down the next day. "They don't match the decor," he said. "We're not in a college dorm anymore, Madison." I asked to keep one small painting in the corner of the reading room. Brandon nodded, but by the following week it was gone. I knew he was a perfectionist. I used to think it meant he was driven, refined, responsible for what he was building. But the longer I lived with Brandon, the clearer it became. His sense of style wasn't about expression, it was about control. And I, gradually, no longer had a place in that space. Brandon didn't ask me to quit work right after the wedding. He just gently suggested, "You could work from home. Find something small like freelance accounting or whatever you enjoy. No need to work 8 hours a day just to earn a few bucks." I still remember laughing. "Brandon, I like working. I like the feeling of standing on my own." He didn't argue. He only gave a slight shrug. "I'm not against it, but don't let it distract you from the bigger role." The bigger role. I understood. To be a wife. To be Brandon Carter's wife. 3 months later I quit, not because Brandon forced me to, but because of the late dinners he refused to eat, the gentle stabs disguised as care. "You look tired. Is it really worth working so much?" And I was tired. Tired from trying to balance work, his family's social events, and the endless, unspoken expectations from my husband. I started staying home more, planning meals, ordering seasonal flowers, learning golf to keep up with the wives of his colleagues. I learned to stay silent when judged. Learned to keep a neutral face when my mother-in-law delivered backhanded insults dressed up as concern. "Madison, you should study more about art," she said once over lunch. "At your age, the Beaumont girl already had a solo exhibit in Florence." I sipped my tea and smiled. I think Florence would love the paintings you picked for our living room. Haha, she didn't like that answer. My friends, the ones who used to text me when I first moved, gradually went quiet. I stopped replying when they invited me out, missed their birthdays, skipped the old group hangouts. Not because I didn't want to, but because there was always something more important. A charity gala, a dinner with media present, a lunch with the CEO wives I had to attend to maintain our image. The last time I spoke with my mother, she asked softly over the phone. "Are you okay, Maddie? I don't hear your laugh anymore." I answered, "I'm fine, Mom. Everything's here." She went silent, then gently said, "Everything's there, but are you?" I paused a long time before changing the subject. Meals became rituals. Brandon came home late, often blamed meetings. The dinners I cooked were eaten alone, in a cavernous dining room between two tall candles and silver cutlery. Pan-seared fish I'd spent 2 hours learning from YouTube. No one complimented it. No one asked. No one cared. Sometimes I overheard Brandon on the phone in his office. His tone even cold, nothing like the way he used to speak to me, the way he called someone babe, the way he paused when I walked past. I started waking earlier, not to cook breakfast, but to spend an hour on the back balcony, watching sunlight filter through the trees. It was the only time I still felt like a real person. One afternoon, while reorganizing the bookshelf, I found the old notebook I used in college to plan my personal finances. The cover was wrinkled, the writing faded, some pages missing, but when I opened it and saw the numbers, the goals, the hopeful notes from a 20-year-old girl, I broke down crying. Not from nostalgia, but from the sudden realization I had lost myself without even noticing. That evening, rain fell over Scottsdale, a rare off-season storm that came fast, forcing me to draw the curtains as water blew onto the balcony. Brandon texted to say he'd be late. Meeting ran long, a phrase I knew by heart like a bedtime prayer. I decided to tidy up his home office, always in a state of calculated mess. Financial documents stacked, luxury pens positioned at precise angles that if disturbed Brandon would notice. I had no reason to be in there, but that day, I don't know why, I wanted to feel close to the version of Brandon I used to know, the one who once asked my opinion on everything, even which stock to buy before quarterly reports. I dusted the desk, picked up a few contracts from under the chair. When I reached into the bottom drawer, usually filled with printer paper and toner, I found a cream-colored envelope. No postmark, no address, just handwritten words, Sophie, unsent. I froze. There was a time when I trusted Brandon so completely that if he said the sky was green, I'd look up to check. But in that moment, my intuition refused to be ignored. I opened the letter, ink on expensive paper, dark blue, neatly aligned. The way Brandon always presented ideas in board meetings. But the content wasn't a pitch. It was a confession, laced with promises. "I know you're frustrated I haven't followed through. You deserve clarity, not excuses. Madison still suspects nothing, but I can't keep lying to you. Just a little more time. I'll talk to her after next week's trip. You know I'm not the kind to make empty promises. I've chosen you, Sophie. I always choose you." I placed the letter on the desk, my palms ice cold. A name. An unfinished promise. Proof that my silence in this marriage wasn't the foundation of peace. It was space someone else had stepped into. I sat in his office for nearly an hour, staring at the reflection of my blurred figure in the glass wall. It felt like someone had pulled the rug from under me. That night, Brandon came home as usual, loosened his tie, kissed my forehead, and asked what was for dinner. I looked at him, closely. The small creases around his eyes, the slight lean in his posture after a long day. I started observing, not with the fury of a betrayed wife, but with the clarity of someone searching for truth. Brandon had a fixed habit. Every Thursday night he attended a strategy group meeting, always ended after 9 p.m. I checked his firm's schedule. There was no such group. I reviewed all his recent business trips. He'd been to Santa Fe, Albuquerque, sometimes Denver, but strangely, there were no project documents related to any of those cities on his company's shared drive. a system I could still access thanks to an old login he gave me when I helped with accounting for a charity event. I documented every location, every date, every word he said. I had no concrete evidence yet, but the puzzle pieces were forming a picture I didn't want to see. It came to a head on a Friday night. Brandon came home late, carrying the scent of a perfume I didn't recognize. Sweet, sharp, undeniably feminine, the kind that lingered in our bedroom until the next morning. I pretended to be asleep. When he lay down beside me, I turned my back, and in a nearly unconscious whisper he murmured, "Good night, Soph." I held my breath. He went silent. Neither of us said another word in that room that night. 3 days later I found her, Sophie L. full name Sophie Langley, a financial attorney for Brandon's family corporation since he was still in business school. She was 4 years older than me and had once appeared at a Carter Christmas party during my first visit home with Brandon. She stood beside Helen, and they both laughed a lot. When I walked up, Sophie shook my hand like she was interviewing an underqualified candidate. I remember clearly Helen turned and said, "Madison?" Sophie was often mentioned by Brandon's father. Smart, sharp, and very well liked by the family. I smiled politely, but deep down, something already bristled during that first encounter. Now I understood. It never stopped. I started tracking Sophie's work travel through LinkedIn, internal memos, and corporate filings. Every location Brandon claimed to visit, Sophie had also passed through that same week. These coincidences happened so frequently, they couldn't be dismissed as chance. But I still didn't confront anyone. I wasn't ready. Not because I was afraid to lose Brandon, but because I feared not having enough to leave without being spun into the unstable, jealous, dramatic one. And I knew someone like Brandon wouldn't let go easily, not when his status, image, and professional web all required a polished wife beside him. I needed more than an unsent letter. I needed the truth, and a quiet, deliberate plan. I brewed tea as always, carried it upstairs, rested my fingers on the handle of the cup as Brandon walked in and said he'd be flying to Denver over the weekend. I smiled and nodded. "You should bring an extra coat. Last time it was cold to the bone." I let the comment pass like it meant nothing. Like I didn't know Denver was code for where Sophie had a satellite office. The following Saturday, after Brandon left the house at 7 a.m., I stepped into the small basement office, the one that used to be a forgotten yoga room. I painted the white wall a soft beige, cleaned off an old desk, set up a private computer, and pinned a sticky note above it. "Start. Quietly." I registered an LLC called M. Lane Financial Advisory, Lane being my mother's maiden name, the woman who once managed our family budget alone while my father was unemployed for 2 years. The LLC was registered in Delaware through a third-party service, with no ties to Scottsdale. No email or phone ever linked to me. The startup fund came from part of the allowance Brandon gave me each month, a sum he labeled household budget, like he was sponsoring a charity initiative. I used $800 from it to open a small brokerage account divided into 3 parts: healthcare stocks, long-term ETFs, and a women's health startup focused on perimenopause. Founded by a nurse in Minnesota I read about in a niche investment newsletter. By day I remained Brandon's wife, attending charity luncheons, dropping off muffins to neighbors, fulfilling my mother-in-law's vision of a graceful, socially respected community figure. But every night, when the house was quiet and the bedroom door was closed, I became someone else. I took online classes on marriage law in Tennessee, California, and Arizona. I wrote down every rule about asset division, separate property exemptions, and the anonymous clause in the prenup Brandon once vaguely mentioned. I found it and printed 3 copies. I also discovered a community I didn't know I needed. In a private forum I met women like me, those financially controlled by their gentle husbands. One woman, Emily P., messaged me late one night. "Every time I ask my husband about our investment accounts, he says it's too complicated for you to understand, but I'm a CPA, can you believe that?" We started talking. I helped Emily audit her full financial plan and discovered her husband had used her name to take out risky real estate loans. I walked her through legal next steps. How to exit without financial ruin. She emailed me later. "No one's ever believed in me the way you did. Thank you, Emlane. You're a light. From one client I had 3, then 6. I didn't advertise. I didn't promote, I simply did the work, well enough that each woman referred another. I received payment through my business account, disguising fees as small household expenses. Furniture. Cake orders for friend events. Brandon suspected nothing. You're keeping yourself busy, huh? He said one evening, seeing me write a client report. I admire your diligence. It gives you depth. Thank you, I smiled. I'm learning to invest in long-term things. I wasn't lying, I was investing in myself. In a future Brandon couldn't touch, couldn't control, and couldn't price. I worked late into the night, tracking every dollar, every tax rule change, every clause in the contracts I reviewed for clients. I was no longer the woman waiting for dinner to be shared. I was someone quietly building her way out of a marriage where affection masked manipulation. And for the first time in years, when I looked in the mirror, I saw myself returning. It was a bright Friday morning in mid-April when I arrived at the Southwest Women in Finance Regional Summit. I had hesitated all week. My name wasn't on the speakers list, nor was I in the featured founders group. But I had a pass from a former client. And more than anything, I wanted to know where the market was heading. I pulled my hair back, wore a navy suit, and pinned a name tag. M. Lane, Independent Strategy Consultant. Not Madison Carter. Not Brandon's wife. No longer a shadow beside a powerful man. That day, I walked in alone. But didn't feel alone. As I was reading the event board, someone stepped beside me, voice firm, leaning slightly toward mine. Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be busy picking napkin colors for the Carter dinner. I turned. Vanessa Lake. Tall, short hair, sharp-eyed. The same sharpness from the first time I met her in advanced corporate finance. She'd been my toughest rival at NYU, not because she was cruel, but because she was brilliant. So brilliant people either hated her, respected her, or both. And I thought you gave up events like this to fly off to the Women's Leadership Forum in Zurich. We laughed. The competitive years felt far behind us. We sat together for the breakout session on post-pandemic investment models. I shared insights about capital shifts from fintech to public health platforms based on 3 weeks of data I compiled manually for a client. Vanessa tilted her head, tapped the table lightly, and asked, "Solid analysis. Where's the data from?" Cross-referring reports from McKinley, Glassmark, and an independent survey by Women in Seed Fund. She paused, then leaned in and murmured, low enough that only I could hear, "Madison Carter, or whoever you are now, you're better than I thought." There was a time I forgot that, I said. After the seminar, we grabbed coffee together in the lounge. The conversation quickly drifted into the past. Senior year of college, when Vanessa pitched a fintech project she co-founded, a social credit platform for female entrepreneurs. Brandon, then a summer intern at a major investment fund, altered the funding terms at the last minute. The blow cost Vanessa her lead investor, and she later had to sell the platform for pennies. "He thought I didn't know what was behind it," Vanessa said, swirling her coffee. "But the truth is, I knew exactly who pulled the strings. I was just waiting for the right time." I looked up at her. Maybe we're both waiting for the same time. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, fingers tapping a slow rhythm. "What are you really doing now? And I don't mean being the wife of a successful man." I looked her straight in the eye. "I run a private strategy consulting practice. Most of my clients are women under financial control during marriage or divorce. I also work with a few small and mid-size investment firms, helping them optimize capital flow and restructure operations. Under the name M. Lane. Want to work with me?" I paused. "Doing what exactly?" Laken Wells just closed our second funding round for a venture fund specializing in women-led startups. I need someone who can read data, understands the market, but also sharp enough to spot inflated valuation models. I've tested 3 strategy analysts. They all read things like, "It's still a textbook." I thought for a few seconds. "My name doesn't go on the website. I'll work as a silent advisor, report directly to you, and I reserve the right to walk if the project crosses an ethical line." She laughed. Still the same Madison. Stubborn, but in the right ways. We shook hands. Not a handshake of trust, but of respect. And a deal. Vanessa sent me an internal file the moment I got home. A startup in Austin valued at 5 times its revenue, claiming to revolutionize financial transactions through AI. I tore through the documents, analyzed cash flow, flagged signs of data manipulation, and sent back a detailed evaluation within 36 hours. Vanessa called, her voice lower than usual. "You're not good, Madison. You're building something big, aren't you? I don't want to spend the rest of my life being the only woman in the room and still expected to stay silent just to make others comfortable." She laughed, a real one this time. "Welcome to the team." From that day on, I began working with Vanessa. Each week, I sent 3 to 4 in-depth analyses along with investment adjustment recommendations. Some turned into immediate strategies, some sparked debates with the core investment team. But most important of all, I was entering a world Brandon believed I could never understand. I told Brandon I'd be heading to Tucson that weekend for a women's business development summit. He seemed distracted, like calculating something. "Good. You should expand your network. These things suit you." I didn't say the summit had been canceled. I didn't say the suitcase I packed the night before only held a few sets of sleepwear and a notebook. I needed Brandon to believe I was going far away. The more certain he was, the more careless he'd be. I rented a short-term apartment 10 minutes from home. The week before, I'd installed a mini camera system around the house. Wireless, app-controlled. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, one hidden inside a ceramic vase in the second-floor hallway, facing the bedroom door. I wasn't hoping to catch something explicit. I only needed proof. That my suspicions weren't made up. That the man who once held my hand and promised a decent life was using me as a prop to maintain his image. On Saturday, I left the house early, drove around the city for a while, then returned to the temporary apartment. I didn't touch my phone for 3 hours. No screen, no texts, no calls. I had coffee alone, jotted a few thoughts in my notebook. By early afternoon, my phone lit up, motion alert. First floor hallway camera, door opened. Brandon walked in, Sophie followed. I opened the living room feed. Sophie took off her coat, her blonde hair tied neatly, her dress fitted tight with confidence, her steps unhurried. "I thought she really left," Sophie said, placing her purse on the couch. Brandon laughed, unfastening his watch, walking to the bar to pour 2 glasses of wine. "She did. She's a good girl, doesn't suspect a thing." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "You're still living under the same roof with her and brought me back here?" Brandon walked over, handed her a glass. "Look, Madison is the kind of woman who lives for appearances. She's not going to make a scene. I just need to keep up this ideal husband image for a few more months, for the upcoming media grant cycle. After that, it's done." "You said that last month," Sophie pressed. Brandon sighed. "You don't understand media, Soph. People eat up successful marriages. They hate drama. If I announce a divorce right now, the entire humanitarian finance campaign my family fund is running would blow up. I can't let that mess up Carter Equity's IPO." I sat frozen, my fingers digging into the armrest of the temporary sofa, lips pressed to keep any sound in. Sophie leaned on the armrest, angled toward Brandon. "And what about me? Still the woman in the shadows?" Brandon stepped closer, placing a hand on her back. "Just a few more weeks, I promise. You think I enjoy pretending to be the loving husband? Sometimes it felt like you were starting to believe your own act." Brandon chuckled, voice lowered. "She's no match for you, Soph. She graduated top of her class, sure, but she builds her life on tiny ideas. No real power. The kind of woman you could mold, keep presentable, and above all, convenient." I saved the footage, the entire conversation, backed it up to 3 separate drives. One was scheduled to send via email to the divorce attorney I'd consulted, one I kept locked in a safe, and one, I printed the transcript and filed it neatly into a legal folder titled, "Everything He Didn't Think I Knew." 3 days later, I invited Brandon to dinner at home. A calm, quiet evening like 100 before. I cooked his favorite dish, butter lemon cod with wild mushroom risotto. I poured Bordeaux, the same kind he always chose, and wore the cream knit dress his mother once complimented as elegant, right for a Carter daughter-in-law. Brandon was cheerful. He thought I was still the Madison he could control. Midway through the meal, I placed a yellow envelope on the table. Inside was a transcript of the conversation and a formal letter from my attorney's office requesting the initiation of divorce proceedings. Brandon opened it and read. His face remained unchanged for the first 20 seconds. By the third line, his eyes jerked upward, and when he flipped to the final page, where the line "She's no match for you, Soph" was printed in bold, I saw something in his expression for the first time. Fear. "What are you planning to do with this?" he asked, voice raspy. "That depends on you," I replied. "If you want to fight, I have more. If you want a quiet ending, sign it." Brandon remained motionless, his fork frozen mid-air like he couldn't believe that I, the obedient wife he thought he had molded, had flipped the board without making a sound. I stood up and cleared the dishes as if nothing had happened. I watched his back begin to dip forward slightly, as if the weight of his own pride, carried for so many years, was finally starting to crumble, layer by layer. 3 days after Brandon received the divorce papers, the first article appeared. The headline in Nashville Weekly, the lifestyle magazine my mother-in-law read every Sunday morning, read, "Young wife of Carter Group CEO files for divorce amid mental health treatment." Below it was a photo of me at a charity event, my face caught mid-blink, looking tired and distant. The story was carefully crafted. I was under pressure from social expectations, showing signs of burnout after years of stepping back from her career, possibly affected by undiagnosed depression. Not one word mentioned the affair. Not one line acknowledged the recording. Nothing about my financial rights. Brandon didn't speak to the press. He had people for that. On investment forums, a few anonymous accounts started leaking insider info. Madison Carter was an unstable, jealous wife who tried to control her husband's finances. A small-town woman dazzled by the high life who eventually lost herself. I read everything. Didn't miss a single line. But I didn't react. Because I knew if I reacted now, they'd drag me exactly where they wanted. Into the emotional mud. I used that time to build a team. Rebecca Goldman was the first. A top-tier divorce attorney based in Phoenix, known for being cold, calculated, and undefeated once she took on a case. She asked me only one question at our first meeting. "Do you want out clean or do you want him to pay?" "I want to reclaim exactly what I built, and I want to make sure he never uses another woman like he used me." Rebecca pulled out a thick contract and signed on the spot. The second person I met was someone I never thought I'd collaborate with, David Langley, Sophie's ex-husband. We met in a conference room on the 32nd floor of a downtown office building. David wore a gray dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He walked in, glanced at me, didn't shake hands right away. "I didn't come here to talk about Sophie," he said. "I didn't come here to listen about her either," I replied. "Then what are we working together for?" "Because we both once believed in the same kind of people," I said, holding his gaze. "And we were both betrayed in the same way." David was a senior financial consultant, with a network stretching from tech firms to the most discreet family offices in the state. He was the first to show me a few hidden accounts under Brandon's name, one being a stock portfolio in Luxembourg, registered under initials. I handed David verified copies of old authorization documents I had signed, papers I didn't realize at the time were being used to funnel money through my name. David gave a bitter smile. "You know what? Guys like him always think women like you are too busy picking curtain colors. They don't think you're sharp enough to remember every brokerage number. That's because they confuse quiet women with foolish ones." Rebecca, David, and I became a quiet but lethal triangle. Rebecca handled legal, David tracked the finances, and I knew Brandon better than anyone. I knew how he built his spreadsheets, how he masked spending as conference fees, how he wrote down account names by hand to avoid leaving digital trails. I reopened every bank statement from our second year of marriage onward. I combed through each expense, transaction, memo line, and built a categorized breakdown: family expenses, personal expenses, suspicious charges. When I sent that spreadsheet to Rebecca, she texted me back one line. "Addison, you did the job of 3 senior financial analysts." While Brandon portrayed himself as the wounded husband, I quietly submitted evidence to the court: consulting contracts, investment invoices, intellectual property rights registered under M. Lane, with proof that Brandon had never contributed a single dollar or asset to it. I didn't clap back in the media, but I contacted the content lead at the New Standard, an independent platform focused on women, marriage, and finance. I didn't give an interview. I sent one email. Subject line: "I'm not out of control. I'm reclaiming it." Attached were 3 pages from my financial file. No names, but clear enough to show who was lying. The article went live 3 days later. No names, no photos, but it spread fast. In the comments, hundreds of women shared similar stories. One wrote, "I was called unstable too, just because I said I want control over my finances." I read every comment. I didn't share the post. But I knew. The truth was, finding space to breathe, and Brandon was no longer the only one in control of the narrative. The trial began on a hot morning in June. Scottsdale's air was heavy, but the courtroom was so cold I had to wear a light coat over my navy suit. I took my place on the left, the respondent's side, with my hand gently placed on a folder marked by color-coded tabs. Rebecca sat next to me, her expression sharp as glass. Brandon was seated directly across, 3 meters away, yet it felt like an entire world apart. He wore a charcoal gray tailored suit, a navy silk tie. His face was flawless, his hair slicked to the side. To an outsider, he looked like a heartbroken husband. And indeed, during the opening statement, his attorney, a silver-haired man with a warm, measured voice, told a completely different story. "Mr. Carter has always prioritized building a life and family. When Mrs. Madison stepped away from her career to become a homemaker, he supported every living expense: education, health, personal development. And yet, she secretly launched a business, concealed assets, and now seeks an unfair division of Mr. Carter's estate." Brandon kept his face composed, nodding occasionally, glancing at me like I was some distant stranger, a woman either pitied or blamed. The judge was Dana Melrose, a woman in her mid-50s with graying hair pinned low, known for her fairness in high-stake divorce trials. She showed no emotion. Didn't interrupt. Let Brandon's team speak all the way through. Then finally turned to Rebecca. Rebecca didn't say much. She stood and placed a thick folder on the wooden table. "Your Honor, the respondent will present rebuttal evidence, along with documentation confirming that the disputed assets were established entirely independently during the course of the marriage." Judge Melrose nodded. I stood. My legs didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. "Your Honor, I do not deny that my husband provided for our living expenses during the early years of our marriage. But I am not the dependent housewife he claims I was. I am the founder of M. Lane Financial Advisory, an independently registered business built from my personal income and reinvested earnings over the past 3 years. Not a single dollar from Mr. Brandon Carter was used for this company." I turned to Rebecca's assistant and received the folder. "I submit 3 years of tax filings, bank statements, independent consulting contracts, and payment confirmations from over 60 corporate clients." Papers rustled throughout the room. I continued. "I also present a detailed investment portfolio comprising 12 individual stocks, 3 ETFs, and 2 startup projects, managed through a decentralized investment entity with no connection to Carter Group." Brandon's lawyer attempted to interrupt, but the judge raised her hand to signal silence. "I'm not finished," I said, voice steady. "I submit audio and visual evidence obtained through a private camera system installed by me in our home, proving that Mr. Brandon Carter brought his mistress, Ms. Sophie Langley, into our residence, and clearly stated that maintaining the marriage was solely for public image, shareholder confidence, and media perception." Rebecca placed the USB and printed transcript on the judge's desk. I saw Brandon turn to his lawyer, panic in his eyes. His lips pressed shut, no longer able to maintain his usual composure. I paused for a beat, then closed. "And finally, I submit the deed to our current residence, held under an LLC I established in our 2nd year of marriage, purchased from a bankrupt corporation, using my personal funds." Mr. Carter signed the transfer agreement, unaware he was selling the property back to me, through a legally binding transaction executed under the name M. Lane Holdings. The courtroom fell silent. I didn't look at Brandon. I only heard the sharp click of his pen hitting the cold stone floor. "Mrs. Carter," Judge Melrose said, "I will need time to fully review this documentation, but in principle, if these assets were built, managed, and maintained independently, with no financial contribution from the petitioner, they qualify as separate property." Brandon's lawyer stood, voice raised. "Your Honor, our side has received no prior notice regarding these assets. We request additional time to verify." Rebecca responded calmly. "The respondent followed all legal protocols regarding disclosure, and we have proof that the petitioner was previously notified and chose to ignore it." Judge Melrose flipped through the documents, her eyes scanning the figures sharply. She closed the folder and looked directly at Brandon. "Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say?" Brandon stood, his face was pale. I didn't know. She never—" "That's exactly the problem," Judge Melrose interrupted. "You never knew, and you completely misjudged the woman you lived with. That is not Mrs. Carter's fault." I lowered myself into the chair, finally letting out the breath I'd been holding since I stood. Rebecca placed her hand over mine and gave it a light squeeze. We both knew the silence was over, and the truth, at last, had a voice. 1 year later, I stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, holding a slide clicker as the MC's voice echoed beyond the curtain. "Please welcome the founder of Clearline, Madison Lane." I stepped into warm applause. Golden lights lit the stage. The large auditorium stretched into darkness before me, hundreds of faces waiting for a talk about finance. But I wasn't here to speak about numbers. I was here to talk about something I once didn't dare name. Freedom. "I was once the wife of a very successful man," I began, my voice clear and steady, no notes needed. "I lived in a 3-story mansion, held a platinum credit card, appeared on every luxury charity guest list in Scottsdale. I had everything, except myself." Behind me, a photo appeared on the screen, me at 27, standing next to Brandon at a gala. I wore a deep navy dress, smiling politely, a perfect smile. But I remembered that night. I cried alone in the restroom after his mother called me an eyesore in front of her friends. We're taught that successful women balance it all, but in truth we're expected to sacrifice in silence. The fewer our demands, the more acceptable we become. I paused, looking out at the audience. I'm not here to tell a story about winning a divorce, because legally speaking, I didn't win anything. I just stopped losing. Oh, to myself. The next slide showed a line chart from an initial $800 investment in a health tech startup to today. A portfolio worth over $11 million, spanning fintech, education, and public health. This isn't an achievement, it's evidence that you don't need the perfect background to begin. You just need one decision, that from today forward you'll no longer hand your future over to someone else. I spoke about Clearline, the organization I founded 6 months after the divorce trial. A free platform helping women who've left controlling relationships or marriages learn to budget, understand asset rights, and rebuild financial independence. It started as a weekly newsletter. Now it has nearly 300,000 subscribers and over 20 expert advisors nationwide. We don't call women who've been hurt victims, we call them survivors. I stopped, letting the words settle into the room. Brandon's name was never mentioned in the talk, but everyone knew. He now appeared on Forbes Under Fire's list of fallen entrepreneurs after being caught falsifying corporate asset reports, thanks to a whistleblower introduced accidentally by David Langley. The house he once mocked as just a name on paper was sold to repay defrauded investors. Sophie vanished from the public eye. Her lawyer issued a statement claiming she was not involved. I ended the talk slowly, each word deliberate. I'm not standing here today because I'm better than anyone. I'm standing here because I stopped trying to become someone to be loved and started investing in myself. The auditorium held still. Then came the applause, not loud but deep and sustained. Women in the front rows stood. I saw a silver-haired woman crying, holding her daughter's hand, maybe 20 years old. They nodded at me as I stepped off stage. Freedom isn't a luxury, it's something I had to dig out from the ashes of a glamorous life I never truly lived. I tell my story not to prove I'm stronger than anyone else, and not to turn pain into a victory badge. I tell it because I know someone is sitting in a quiet kitchen right now, holding a cold cup of tea, wondering, am I the only one who feels lost in my own home? Maybe you've never been in a courtroom, but maybe you've had your feelings questioned. Maybe you loved someone so much you forgot how to recognize yourself fading away. So tell me, have you ever had to choose between comforting silence and a truth that hurts? Have you ever had to walk away not because you wanted to, but because staying meant erasing who you are? Share your story in the comments. Nothing is too small. No one is too invisible. Because every woman who finds her voice becomes part of a change bigger than any of us imagine. If this story resonated with you, follow the channel so you won't miss the next journey. Stories about family, dignity, and freedom. Not as a slogan, but as something real.